It's pretty obvious that Yes supporters are having trouble coming to grips with the magnitude of their loss. They may not like the result, but they've just got to accept it if they really believe in democracy. On Saturday night, the Prime Minister said that he accepted the result and he agreed that yes and no voters alike were all Australian, before basically relitigating the whole failed Yes case.
Look, we accept the result.
Yeah.
We accept the outcome. We are not yes voters or no voters. We are all Australians. And it is as Australians together that we must take our country beyond this debate without forgetting why we had it in the first place. Because too often in the life of our nation and in the political conversation, the disadvantage confronting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has been relegated to the margins. This referendum and my government has put it right at the centre.
No such acceptance from Indigenous activists, though. Instead of accepting defeat, as Prime Ministers and opposition leaders routinely must, the main Indigenous Yes backers have declared a week of silent mourning, as if a democratic outcome should ever be mourned, and effectively shut up shop rather than admit they massively overreached. Very few referendums have been defeated as decisively as this one. Yet having lost the voice, the Prime Minister is still keen on the rest of the Uluru trifecta. After saying for many months that the government was committed to implementing the Uluru Statement in full, voice first, then treaty, then truth, he seems inclined to push on with the rest of the agenda, even though it wasn't just the voice that was rejected on Saturday, it was the whole separatist mindset that Uluru exemplified. Now, this is extraordinary arrogance, even for Labor, and extraordinary political stupidity too, given that at last count, over 40% of the Labor vote abandoned the Prime Minister on Saturday. And I give you the tip, keep pushing on with a treaty and they won't be coming back. Today in Question Time on his Makarrata Treaty Commission, again and again, the PM dodged an honest answer.
Will the Prime Minister be honest and upfront with Australians and inform the House whether or not he remains committed to a treaty and truth-telling process?
What I have said very clearly is that I will give respect to Indigenous Australians who have asked for a week to consider their position. I think that is pretty reasonable.
I mean, seriously, can't the PM read the room? Look at the latest count today. The Australian people could not be clearer. And unlike a constitutionally entrenched voice, where he had to ask the people, the government wouldn't need the people's vote to push on with a treaty and truth-telling, because neither are constitutional changes, even though a treaty would change us as a country in every way possible. Now, in the Voice campaign, when I argued that a treaty was part of the PM's plan, that if you voted for a voice, you would get a treaty, I was all but cancelled. It was all there in the full Uluru Statement. Yet the Prime Minister, who's admitted he's never even read the full statement anyway, still accused me of running a conspiracy theory.
This is a ripper. That is the Uluru Statement from the heart on an A4 bit of paper. Nothing exposes the falseness of the arguments being put by the No campaign than this conspiracy theory and nonsense. It's something that has been out there, like a whole lot of the QAnon theories. We have all sorts of conspiracy stuff out there. That is a conspiracy in search of a theory, Mr Speaker. They're struggling to get their scares straight. I mean, what role did Marcia Langton play in the faking of the moon landing, Mr Speaker?
Well, who's right now? Because yesterday and today in the Parliament, all the indications from the government are that they will keep pushing on with their Makarrata Treaty plans for a commission that's made up by a majority of Indigenous appointees that'll spend upwards of $27 million in set-up costs alone, And that's, of course, before we factor in the many billions that would come with reparations. And all of this still up there on the Prime Minister's own website. It's like Saturday night never, ever happened. Today, Anthony Albanese pledged to continue to listen to Aboriginal leaders.
Our commitment to listening to Indigenous Australians is undiminished. Our commitment to closing the gap is undiminished. We accepted the invitation from First Nations people, which was given in the Uluru Statement from the heart.
So he's listening to them, but not to you. I mean, he's arrogantly thumbing his nose at the majority of voters, and every single state that rejected his plan for race-based division. If democracy is meant to mean anything, the entire Uluru agenda has got to be junked, not just the voice, because voters will rightly conclude that the PM doesn't give a tinker's cuss about what everyday Australians think. That he's more than happy to listen to the Aboriginal establishment led by Noel, Pearson and Marcia, Langton, but not to the voters in Labor's traditional heartland, which have massively rejected the Uluru agenda. And almost nothing would maximise Peter Dutton's chance to make this a one-term government than the PM showing he's got a tin ear, not just once on the voice, but twice if he goes down this path of treaty. Now, how can a country make a treaty with its own citizens? And why would a self-respecting country ever set up a so-called truth-telling commission, a kind of official self-flagellation society, to tell a one-sided, jaundiced view of our own history? But there's a deeper danger in the left's attempt to delegitimise this referendum result, namely the incessant refrain that yes only failed because of so-called misinformation from the No campaign. For instance, here's Troy Bramston in The Australian today, claiming, and I quote, deliberate misinformation propagated by the No camp on the political and legal implications of the voice, with Trump-like arguments to sow confusion, resentment and fear. Now, I'm sorry, Troy, a former staffer, of course, for Kevin Rudd. I'm sorry, Troy, but just because some former judges claim that the voice was legally safe doesn't mean it was so-called misinformation to cite other former judges who said that it wasn't safe. And just because some people claim that the voice would be no more than an advisory committee doesn't mean that it was misinformation to say, well, it would be, in fact, so much more than that, especially when so many of the latter-day voice minimalists had changed their tune to try and save a floundering proposal. Just because there's a disagreement doesn't mean that the other side is peddling misinformation as opposed to raising inconvenient facts. Inconvenient facts that shouldn't be silenced just because the leftist establishment and big tech doesn't find them persuasive. Now you can see where this all is heading, can't you? Having lost this referendum, mostly through a good social media campaign from Fair Australia, the left doesn't want to lose again. That's why the government's looking to muzzle social media through the coming legislation against so-called misinformation and disinformation. Now, democracies work this time because the arguments against the voice couldn't be suppressed, because people like me refused to be cancelled and stopped telling you about the full agenda of Uluru, as did Sky News. But if the government gets its way, future no cases will be deplatformed as misinformation. They won't even get a chance to get cancelled because big tech won't allow it. Indeed, won't be allowed to even have them posted online. This is a deeply sinister piece of legislation, and it should be junked along with a voice, along with treaty, if free speech is to mean anything and our democracy is to remain vigorous.